When someone no longer values you, the first reaction is often pain, anger, or the urge to prove your worth. But the response that truly brings strength doesn't come from the outside. It starts within, from the courage to look directly at yourself. A hard truth to hear. Being taken for granted is not always because the other person changed. Sometimes, it's the result of you unconsciously allowing it to happen, by trading your self-worth to hold on to a connection, by sacrificing your self-respect just to be accepted. The simple trick here isn't a tactic or psychological hack. It's a powerful internal act, self-reflection. The journey of honestly, bravely, and unflinchingly looking inward. As Carl Jung said, every relationship is a mirror of your inner world. When someone stops valuing you, it might signal that it's time to return to yourself. Have a conversation within and start over, not to change them, but to return to who you truly are. They may no longer value you, but have you ever truly valued yourself? The answer lies just below. Number 1. Looking within. What have you allowed to happen? Of all the things that make us hurt when we are taken for granted, the hardest to accept isn't what others did. It's the truth that we unconsciously allowed it to happen. Not because you are weak, not because you lack worth, but because there are things within you, old wounds, invisible beliefs, unhealed memories, that are shaping your behavior without your awareness. Be honest with yourself. How many times have you stayed silent when hurt? How many times have you said yes while your heart screamed no? How many times have you backed down, not because you truly wanted to forgive, but because you were afraid of losing the connection? These actions, small as they may seem when repeated, send a clear message. I'm willing to endure. I don't need to be a priority. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This means, if you can't see what's silently operating in your mind, you'll keep falling into the same situations, repeating the same kinds of relationships where you're overlooked, dismissed, or left behind. A romantic relationship where you're always the one who makes peace. A friendship where you're always the one who texts first. A job where you constantly go above and beyond your role and never get recognition. You might have thought, if I just try a little harder, they'll change. But the truth is, others don't learn to value you through your reasoning, but through how you treat yourself. This is the moment to confront the shadow Jung spoke of. The shadow isn't some evil lurking inside you. It's all the parts you once rejected. Anger, the desire to be heard, the yearning to be acknowledged, things you were taught, for various reasons, were not okay to have. And when the shadow isn't faced, it slips into your behavior. You act understanding, but deep inside, you're holding back anger. You stay in an unhealthy relationship while telling yourself you're just being tolerant. A familiar example, a woman in a long-term relationship. She's not insulted or abused, but every time she shares her true feelings, her partner withdraws. She stays silent at first because she doesn't want to cause drama. Then, because she thinks she's being too sensitive. Later, because, what's the point? Nothing will change. And over time, she stops speaking up. Not because she has no feelings left, but because deep down, she's come to believe her feelings don't matter. Does that feel familiar? Maybe in the past, you were a child who didn't dare express sadness for fear of seeming weak, who was ignored when needing comfort, who learned that only by being good, smart, or successful would you be noticed, and you grew up with an unconscious pattern that love must be earned through self-sacrifice. You carry that pattern into every relationship, romantic, friendly, professional, familial. You give in a little more, tolerant a little more. Look the other way one more time, just to keep the peace, to preserve the connection, to avoid being left behind. But at some point, you no longer recognize who you are in the relationship. You just know you feel empty, exhausted, and hurt that others don't see your worth, while you've been the one quietly giving it away, piece by piece. And then one day, you stop, not because they changed, but because you start asking a different question. Why did I accept this? Jung believed that the healing journey always begins with making the unconscious conscious. When you're brave enough to trace your behaviors back to their root, you'll see clearly. The person who hurt you today is merely the new face of an old wound, a pain that was never acknowledged, a need that was never met, returning in another form to remind you. You are still repeating the pattern, but this is not a sentence. This is a chance. Recognizing the pattern is the first step to breaking it. When you see what keeps replaying in your life and admit that you no longer want to keep living this way, you place your hand on the door to inner freedom. And the beautiful truth is, you can choose differently. You don't need an apology. You don't need them to come back. You don't need circumstances to change. You just need to step out of the role you once played. From the moment you start seeing yourself as someone worthy of being heard, respected, and loved, not because you are perfect, but simply because you are human, you begin rewriting the way the world responds to you. Number 2. Resetting your standards. When you change the way you treat yourself, the world responds. Most of the times, we feel dismissed by others, and it does not begin with a clear action on their part, but with the quiet ways we've allowed it to happen. Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This means you cannot expect others to treat you well until you have seriously asked yourself, how have I been treating myself? People learn how to treat you based on what you repeatedly allow. If you are always willing to help without asking for respect, always patient instead of speaking up, always sacrificing your own needs to please others, then what you are unconsciously teaching them is, I don't need to be prioritized. I can be overlooked. And the irony is, you are often the one who feels the most hurt when this happens again. Because deep down, you do not deserve to be treated that way. But a sense of worthiness doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It comes from a deep connection with yourself, and this is where Jung's theory becomes practically useful. Carl Jung believed that most people live out roles imposed by society, which he called the persona, or social mask. We become the good child, the ideal partner, the pleasant colleague, sometimes to the point of losing what is essential. When you stay too long in a persona, you start to believe your value depends on pleasing others, and you begin to forget that you have the right to say no, the right to feel angry, the right to be heard, even if that makes others uncomfortable. Peeling off that mask is part of the journey Jung called individuation, the most important journey of a human life, where you stop living to satisfy external expectations and begin returning to and rediscovering your true self. On that path, you will have to face the shadow, the parts of you that were rejected or labeled negative, like anger, the need to be recognized, and the desire for control. But Jung did not see the shadow as evil. He saw it as unconscious, and if you don't face it, it will quietly run your life, especially in your closest relationships. For example, if in the past your emotions were ignored, and you learned that being good is the key to love, then you may grow up believing your presence must always come with sacrifice. You'll find yourself in relationships where you are the one who tries a little harder, puts up with a bit more, and lets it go one more time just to keep the peace. You will keep meeting people who replay this pattern, not because you enjoy suffering, but because your unconscious is pulling you back to a familiar script, hoping that this time you will fix it. And this is where resetting your standards becomes a turning point, when you begin clearly defining what you need, what is unacceptable, and where the boundaries of respect and kindness lie. You begin rewriting the narrative about yourself. You're no longer living by the old script. You are stepping out of the shadow and into the light of awareness. Others may not like your change. They might say you've become different, distant, or cold. But the truth is, you're just becoming clearer. And when you are clear about your values, your boundaries, and your self-respect, the world has no choice but to adjust. Those who once took advantage may drift away. Those who once dismissed you may feel confused. But only then can new relationships, where you are truly seen and respected, have the chance to enter. Resetting your standards isn't about changing others. It's a quiet but powerful declaration. I am different now. I no longer act out of fear of abandonment. I act from self-awareness and self-love. And it is this inner transformation that gives you the power to change the world around you. Number 3, setting boundaries, not to distance, but to clarify. After all the reflection and awakening, there comes a defining phase, setting boundaries. This is not an act of rebellion, nor a reactive outburst of pain. It is a conscious choice, a quiet declaration that you know who you are, and you are no longer willing to be overwhelmed by what no longer aligns with you. Setting boundaries doesn't mean closing your heart or building walls. On the contrary, boundaries are a mental map that helps others understand how to engage with you healthily. They're like road signs, speed limit zone, private path, do not cross the line, not out of hostility, but for safety on both sides. When you don't make clear what's okay and what's not, ambiguity becomes the breeding ground for conflict, hurt, and being taken for granted. Carl Jung warned that people often lose themselves when they spend too long living through roles, the social masks, persona, we wear to be accepted, to be nice, agreeable, reasonable. But if you don't draw a line in your efforts to please, you'll eventually blur the boundary between who you are and what society expects of you. The frightening part is that you won't realize you're fading until you feel tired, burned out, or hurt to the point of no return. Boundaries are how you name yourself again. In a world that constantly pushes you to dissolve, they're how you tell the world, I have limits, I have value, and I'm not here to endure. Some confuse boundaries with distance, but the truth is, without boundaries, real connection isn't possible, because true connection happens when two people meet in clarity, without intrusion, without self-erasure to hold on to someone. Boundaries allow you to love without losing yourself, to stay close without becoming blurred, and most importantly, they allow you to walk away when your presence is no longer respected. From Jung's perspective, when you don't set boundaries, you're living from an ego shaped by fear, the fear of being abandoned, rejected, judged. Your shadow might whisper, don't say that, they'll get upset, or better to tolerate it than be left. But every time you choose silence over naming your limits, you're not just stepping back in the relationship, you're also withdrawing respect from yourself. When you start saying no clearly, without apologizing, without hesitation, without guilt, you are doing something deeply important. You are retraining your unconscious to believe that you are worth protecting. Jung said, What is not made conscious will continue to direct your life, and boundaries are a conscious act with profound transformative power. But make no mistake, setting boundaries is not comfortable. It may provoke reactions, especially from those who are used to you being easygoing, always available, never saying no. They may say you've become cold, different, and selfish. But remember, their reactions don't define what's right or wrong. They simply reveal how much they have benefited from your lack of boundaries. If someone walks away just because you've begun protecting your wholeness, let them go. Not because you don't care, but because you understand. True love doesn't come from endless compromise. It comes from the meeting of two mature individuals, each knowing their boundaries and respecting those of the other. Setting boundaries doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to step back from a disrespectful conversation, to stop texting first, to say, "I'm not okay with that," without needing to explain. These small, repeated actions are like bricks rebuilding the foundation of your self-respect. You're reconstructing a home that others once walked in and out of freely. Now, you hold the key. And the beautiful truth is, when you set boundaries, your energy shifts too. You don't need to say, "I've changed." Others will sense it in your gaze, in your presence, in the firmness of your gentle refusal. Those who once took you lightly will realize it's no longer so easy. And those who are truly right for you, they won't be scared off by your boundaries. On the contrary, they'll feel safer because they know you are clear enough not to hurt yourself and not to hurt them unconsciously. Boundaries don't distance you, they define you. And only when you are clear with yourself can you create healthy relationships where no one has to sacrifice themselves to be loved, where everyone gets to be who they are without compromising their wholeness. Number 4, the practice of letting go, not out of coldness, but for liberation. Letting go is one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern life. Many associate it with coldness, detachment, or emotional indifference. But in its truest sense, letting go is not about turning your back on others. It's an act of returning to yourself. It's not the denial of love, but the release of what no longer aligns with your true nature. Carl Jung did not speak of letting go as a rigid severing of ties, but as a process of ego death and rebirth, something impossible if you keep clinging to old forms, old relationships, or outdated definitions of who you are. Jung believed that every person must undergo a symbolic death, an internal ending, before a more mature self can emerge. And in the context of a relationship where respect no longer exists, letting go is that necessary death. This doesn't mean you stop feeling or deny what once was. On the contrary, to let go healthily, you must separate your emotions from the situation, like stepping back to view the full picture. When you're too close, all you see are the tangled details, a hurtful comment, a message left unanswered, another broken promise. But when you step back, you see more clearly how many times the pattern has repeated and how much you've given up trying to hold on to something that's slowly unraveling. Instead of asking, "Why are they like this?" try a different question. What do I need to feel at peace? The first question traps you in blame and obsession. The second brings you back to your center, where the answer lies not with them, but with you. Jung believed that what we don't accept will continue to haunt us until we're brave enough to face it, understand it, and release it. Letting go isn't just a rational decision. It's a soulful courage, the kind that leads you out of your comfort zone, even if it means walking through pain, emptiness, and uncertainty. In a relationship where respect is gone, The need to hold on often comes from fear. Fear of being alone, of failing, of not finding something better. But Jung emphasized that all fear points to something unresolved in the unconscious. If you don't recognize that fear, it will keep running your life, keeping you in situations your soul has long since outgrown. The practice of letting go begins with one small decision: to stop letting someone else's behavior control your emotional state. It's when you stop over-analyzing their words, their expressions, their silence, and instead turn inward and ask yourself, what am I feeling? Where am I now? Do I still want this? These questions become a compass guiding you out of attachment, not through resistance, but through awareness. And you don't need to make grand declarations or dramatic moves. Sometimes, letting go is simply stopping. No more trying, no more defending, no more chasing answers, no more justifying. It's a silence that comes from within, not because you've given up, but because you've seen clearly that holding on to what no longer fits is pulling you away from the person you're becoming. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Letting go is when you step into that darkness, facing the parts of you that were denied, the pain, the abandonment, the disappointment. But in doing so, you begin to understand this truth. You don't need others to change for you to be at peace. You just need to stop giving them the power to determine it. When you truly let go, you'll feel something strange. Lightness. Not because it's easy, but because the weight of resistance has been set down. And when you release a connection that is no longer healthy, you're not just ending a relationship, you're creating space to reconnect more deeply with your true self. That's the moment when you no longer need to chase anyone to feel seen. You don't need their return to feel complete. Because the act of letting go is itself a quiet declaration. I've chosen me, and I don't need anyone's permission to do that. Number 5, investing in yourself, rebirth from within. There comes a point in the healing journey when you realize it's time to stop looking outward and begin returning inward. That moment arrives after you've seen through unbalanced relationships, spoken your boundaries, and let go of what no longer nourishes you. Now, what you need is not to find someone new, but to re-establish the connection with yourself. Carl Jung called this the stage of ego rebirth, an essential part of the individuation process. After part of your old self dies, the part that lived to please others, chased validation, tried to prove worth, a new self needs to emerge. But this self cannot be borrowed from the outside. It can only take shape when you begin consciously investing in yourself, not to please anyone, but to live truthfully and wholly with yourself. Investing in yourself shouldn't be confused with shallow notions like looking good, making lots of money, or shining so others regret losing you. Those may be side effects, but they're not the core. At its deepest level, investing in yourself is the act of tending to the neglected parts of your inner life, the silenced child, the passions that were suppressed, the dreams once dismissed as unrealistic, and the pieces of yourself you gave up to hold on to others. What have you put aside because you believed you weren't enough? What opportunities have you declined because you felt undeserving? How many times have you stayed silent so others could speak, even when you had something important to say? When you invest in yourself, it's not just about learning a new skill or pursuing a new goal. It's a message to your unconscious. I've come back to myself, and this time, I'm not abandoning myself again. In Jung's teachings, healing is never about surface-level repair. It's about deep inner integration. When you learn something new, embark on a new path. Allow yourself to play, create, rest, or dive in. You are reviving the life energy that's been suppressed by fear and societal expectation. You are awakening the archetype of the self, the whole, powerful image of who you were born to become. Imagine yourself as a garden. In the past, you poured water into other people's pots, trying to nurture them, keep them, help them bloom. But now, you turn back to water your soil. At first, it may be dry, cracked, and overgrown with weeds because it's been neglected for so long. But if you care for it with patience, plant the seeds you once abandoned, you'll begin to see life return, and something magical will happen. When you start to blossom in your garden, the right bees will naturally find their way to you. Your glow isn't meant to make anyone regret. It isn't to prove anything to those who left. It's because you've stopped trading pieces of yourself just to be loved and started choosing to live aligned with who you are. From that point forward, everything begins to change. You're no longer searching for someone to complete you. You no longer rely on praise to feel confident. You no longer panic when a relationship ends, because you now understand that everything else may fall away. But the connection between you and yourself does not. Someone who has spent too long trying to prove their worth may feel empty without someone to impress. But if you dare to walk through that emptiness, where there's no applause, no one watching, no one validating, you will arrive in a very different space, inner freedom. That's where you read a book not to get smarter, but because you enjoy it. Where you dance, write, cook, meditate, not for anyone to see, but because you see yourself in it. Jung believed that every person holds an inner gold, and our task is not to search for it outside, but to mine it from within, by entering our shadows and bringing it into light. When you dare to walk through your wounds, through loneliness, through abandonment, you'll discover that strength, and the energy restored from that place will begin to radiate from you, quietly, steadily, powerfully. Impossible to ignore. The right people will be drawn to that energy, not because you're trying to become someone, but because you dared to be yourself. Healthy relationships don't come from efforts to make them like you, but from deep honesty with yourself. When you live true, you don't need to chase anyone. You simply keep living in ways that make you feel free, clear, and meaningful, and everything else falls into place. And finally, investing in yourself is not a one-time project. It's a long-term commitment. There will be days when you feel slow, stuck, unsure. But what matters is that you don't go back to old patterns. Don't return to the people who once made you shrink. Every small act, getting up early, writing a few lines, eating well, reading a page, meditating for 5 minutes, doodling in a notebook, is a reminder that you are choosing yourself again. And the more you choose yourself, the more complete you feel. No one needs to notice. No one needs to approve. No one needs to return. Because in the end, the most precious thing is not someone else's attention, but your full presence with yourself. Number 6. Silence is power. Let actions speak. After you've seen yourself, reset your standards, drawn your boundaries, let go, and reinvested in yourself, you enter a new state, a wholeness that no longer needs justification. This is no longer the phase of explanation, defense, or trying to convince others of your worth. It is a quiet but powerful space where your presence speaks louder than anything you ever tried to prove. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." As long as you keep explaining yourself, contorting to repair your image in someone else's eyes, you are resisting a truth that needs to be accepted. Some people simply cannot see you, not because you're not good enough, but because they are not awake enough to meet you at your depth. Once you accept this, the inner tension dissolves. You no longer need to scream in silence to be understood. You choose to walk away quietly but decisively. Silence here is not avoidance or apathy. It is still and clear, soft yet steady, like a lake that reflects the sky without needing waves. In this silence, you don't need to announce your change. Your way of living, choosing, and showing up speaks for itself. You no longer react. You simply step away from conversations that lack honesty. You don't explain how hurt you've been. You just create enough space to ensure that hurt doesn't happen again. You don't send one last message to gain sympathy. You stop and you move on, but this time as a more complete version of yourself, no longer dependent on external validation. Jung believed that when a person becomes conscious, their silence is not empty. It becomes a sacred space for the ego to transform. In that space, there's no noise of fear, no echoes of the past, no pull of outside expectation. Only you sitting with yourself, not running, not resisting, not explaining. And in that stillness, transformation begins. One of the clearest signs of inner maturity is that you speak less. You no longer explain why you set a boundary. You no longer justify your refusal. You don't need anyone to confirm whether you're right or wrong, because you know no one truly sees you through your words. They see you through your energy, the steadiness in your eyes, the gentleness in your actions, and the peace you radiate when you're no longer ruled by the need to be understood. Let your actions do the talking. When you walk away from a relationship that no longer respects you, that's your voice. When you choose rest over pleasing others, that's your voice. When you follow what brings you alive, even without applause, that's your voice. And that voice says more than any explanation ever could. I've returned to myself, and I am whole without needing to be seen. Silence is also the most graceful way to decline shallow connections. You don't need anger, arguments, or to prove who's right. You just disappear from spaces that no longer deserve your energy. And trust this, your absence is not meaningless. To those who are deep, sincere, and attuned, they will feel it, not through words, but through the space you leave behind. And if they don't feel it, that's okay, because the wholeness you've cultivated within does not require recognition to exist. True strength lies in knowing who you are and not needing anyone else to. Silence is the final expression of self-respect. When you no longer debate with those who have no intention of listening, when you no longer share your truth with those who only wait to refute it, when you understand that your presence is a gift, not everyone is meant to cherish it. In Jung's path of individuation, there is a pivotal phase, the moment you stop looking outside to know who you are. You no longer need to, because you've gone deep enough to realize every answer is already within. Your truth needs no agreement, and your love for yourself needs no proof. So if you find yourself in a season of silence, don't fear it. Don't feel guilty for not wanting to share, not wanting to convince, not needing to clarify what is already clear. This is not a retreat. It is the shape of inner strength taking form. A quiet strength, but unshakable. Not loud, but impossible to dismiss. And when you truly reach this state, you'll understand why silence is the final stage of healing. Because from there, everything you do, every action, every choice, every presence carries the energy of someone who has healed, who has grown, and who no longer needs applause to feel complete. Number 7. Conclusion. Rebirth from the shadow. There's a strange, quiet moment that arrives when you reach the end of an inner journey. No more chaos, no more inner conflict, no more urge to hold on to someone or prove anything to the world. Just you, the one who has walked through being overlooked, rejected, underestimated, and yet still stands, whole and more awake than ever. Jung called this the awakening of the true self, the realization of the self. You're no longer driven by the fragile ego that constantly craves recognition, love, and praise. Instead, you begin to live from a deeper place, one where you no longer need external validation to know your worth. The shadow is no longer rejected, but seen, understood, and integrated. And it is this integration that shapes a stronger, more complete self. In the past, when someone failed to value you, you may have felt anger. You tried to prove your worth. You sought justice, an apology, or at least a sign that they regretted. But now, you no longer need that. Not because you don't care, but because you no longer give others the power to define your value. And that is true freedom. Jung once wrote that, "Wholeness is only possible when the shadow is accepted as part of the self." This means you cannot become whole by denying pain, avoiding wounds, or hiding your vulnerabilities. On the contrary, you must go through the shadow, feel it, engage with it, and understand why it exists. Only then can you step into the light, not in a polished disguise, but as a more grounded and authentic version of yourself. Rebirth does not arrive in grand, triumphant moments. It often begins in stillness. It might be the morning you wake up, look in the mirror, and no longer see the person who once begged to be kept. It might be an evening alone, where instead of loneliness, you feel peace. It might be when someone who once hurt you returns, and you realize you no longer want them, not out of resentment, but because you have changed. Rebirth is when you no longer react from your wounds, but act from your healing. When you choose relationships for resonance, not out of fear. When you say no without guilt, and say yes to yourself with certainty. When you no longer need to stand out to be seen, but naturally attract connection through the authenticity of your presence. You've moved from being dismissed to knowing your worth, from trying to fit in to daring to be yourself, from clinging to letting go, from scattered to centered. This is not retaliation. It's a truly Jungian journey, walking through the shadow to arrive in the light, not with arrogance, but with humility and a deep understanding of who you are. Because in the end, you were not born to be approved of. You were born to be whole. You are not here to be validated. You are here to be whole. And when you truly enter that wholeness, you'll see what you once so desperately sought in others was never outside of you. It was always within, simply waiting to be remembered.